Hello and welcome back to the County Chat channel. Today we're going to be doing an Ashes review episode, just sort of looking at all the major talking points and talking all the way through what was going on there. As you might notice, a little bit of colour in my skin. I was actually lucky enough to be out in Australia for a bit of the test and went to the Boxing Day test match. So a slightly different perspective, maybe a bit of a fan perspective of people out there and just chatting away with people and just sort of the general what happened, what went wrong for an England fan or an England cricket team perspective, and just sort of touching on all the major things. I'll keep it fairly short. I don't want to get too bogged down in anything. So we'll sort of kick it off with a big question. I guess it is of the day: is will there be an England regime change after this Ashes? England have had two big 5 Test match series in the time period where McCullum and Stokes have been in charge, and they've lost both of them fairly massively. 4-1 in India and then 4-1 in Australia. I think there's been a lot of pressure put under. I think there's so many things that have, caused frustration and anger. So whether it be, the Brook in New Zealand getting drunk and having a fight with a bouncer, whether it be the Noosa trip, whether it be the lack of preparation in Australia beforehand for red ball cricket, all of these things have kind of built to this culture. I've seen some very interesting, articles and interviews, like I'm sure everyone has. And one very interesting thing that I thought was that Bazball worked instantly for the kind of aging veterans of an England team. So your Johnny Bairstows, your Jimmy Andersons, your Stuart Broads, all these players who needed a bit of like resurgence into their careers. But the people who've now actually come through in the Bazball mould, if you will, or Bazball time period, have actually kind of only known this very relaxed, laissez-faire way of looking at cricket. And it's a sort of give them an inch, they'll take a mile sort of thing. Things like scrapping the curfew at 12 midnight sort of thing. It's interesting. You can get, again, and I'm saying you can get bogged down in a lot of these things. But I think what is interesting, and I think what was clear with Stokes and McCullum's major points, is that they kind of know that things need to change. They know that, the way they're doing stuff isn't working to get them to the top level. I think it got them back to a sort of competitive level in whenever it was, 2022, I think it was when it began. And it got, back playing some very entertaining cricket and some cricket that was great on pitches tailor-made for it in England. But when they've gone to these two major test-playing nations sort of on their own, it's slightly faltered, and not slightly faltered, it's fallen to pieces, I think would maybe be a maybe more harsh, but probably a more fair way of putting it. So, excuse me. So I guess it's an interesting state that they're in, and I think Liam said it on a podcast we did together. Like, McCullum is kind of seemingly locked in the sense of him being the white ball coach for the World Cup coming up. So whether or not, it seems unlikely they'll get rid of him. But having said that, I think a lot of England fans are probably at this point saying, well, why can't he just be the white ball coach? He was a better white ball player himself. I mean, he did have a good red ball career and a good test match captain. But why couldn't he just be the white ball coach and we go on to someone else? And there's a lot of big names who sort of seemingly putting their hat in the ring, Justin Langer being an obvious one, having seen a lot of him on the TV coverage out in Australia. Ravi Shastri, I think I've heard people mention. So these big names, and ECB have the money to be able to go out and get them. It's just interesting to see if they actually will do it. I think they've already called, as they always do. There's going to be an inquiry. There's going to be a bit of a look into it. And on this tour and all the things that came with it, and the drinking in New Zealand and all these things. So it'll be interesting. I think I saw Jonathan Agnew saying, someone must go for the preparation. Whoever signed off on the New Zealand 3-match tour, and then a 1 intra-squad game, and then, playing Australia in the biggest series of, their all of their lives. And that's what they called it going into that Perth test match, that first test match in Perth. This will be the biggest series of our life. They didn't want to shy away from it, but they also didn't treat it with the respect it deserved. So it's kind of a funny, they were aware of it, but maybe it was too late. The horse had bolted by the time they were aware of it. I don't know. An interesting situation to be in. Of course, it's getting to a point where, Stokes, I think, is seemingly fairly untouchable. I think Harry Brook has proven himself not to be anywhere near ready to be a test captain, and not tactically. I think that's maybe more psychologically, mentally, how you hold yourself on a cricket field, and clearly how you hold yourself off a cricket field, with that news story that has come out recently. So yeah, again, I always use the word. It's an interesting phrase. It's an interesting one, but I think this falls into that because it's, where do we see the ECB go from here? Whose head will roll? Who will take the fall for it? Rob Key feels like maybe an obvious one to me, because I think he's been maybe the hallmark of the selection status, but also the kind of attitude to cricket. And I think it's done really, really good things. And I think that's another thing I've been really wary of is trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, talking about everything bad about this series, but also forgetting everything good. Speaking of someone like Harry Brook, I think I saw Jonathan Agnew talking about how the Bazball regime has not been good for him. And that's just mental. I mean, he was the fastest player to ever get to 3,000 test runs, all whilst playing under Baz McCullum and all whilst playing under Ben Stokes. So just because he had a sort of average series or below par series, to be fair, not average because he averages in the 50s and he averaged something like high 30s, I think. That doesn't mean Bazball's been bad for him. I think it just maybe means it's reached a point where he needs to go on to something else for his own development and also take a bit of agency himself. I realise Harry Brook's coming under fire for me here. I'm also talking about people like Jamie Smith and various other players who've shown themselves to really struggle maybe when in those pressure moments it's either grind it out or go for a big shot and sort of say, oh, this is the way we play. And I think it shows that sort of mental weakness a little bit. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a place to kick off from in this podcast, or this sort of mini episode, just sort of Ashes in review, and I obviously want to move on to Australia very quickly. Is not very quickly, just trying not to just go all England fan on it. Australia did well in the pressure moments, and I think I released a clip about sort of saying this, is that Australia will never falter, they'll never give away, and I think they proved that. I think they proved how much, like, when they're under the pump, Australia will dominate, and if you give them anything, they'll dominate. Especially you can win Australia. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really in hard, and it's trying to basically do that on a half approach, or half not fully invested approach wasn't going to work, and it didn't work. Australia's dominance at home is a thing because they focus on the small things. They focus on the controllable things. They field so well. They don't give much away with the ball. And batting, they're probably one of the weaker batting sides they've had for the last 30 years. People would argue, I'd say. But, their big players stepped up at big times. I mean, Travis Head's the obvious one with the bat. Alex Carey as well really proved himself to be one of the top wicketkeeper batsmen in world cricket. And I think the gulf between him and Jamie Smith was a really, really obvious one. Travis Head moving up the order as well. It was all of a sudden that they had an incredibly effective opener, and England were just stuck with Crawley and Duckett, who were both having, Duckett had a really poor series for his standards in Test cricket, and Crawley had a kind of series to his average. But for a Test opener, that is bad. Early 30s, late 20s average is not good enough. So again, trying to not get bogged down in the ins and outs, because I think I'm going to be doing a slightly more like report card based thing, talking about each player and how they did, and looking for their future as a Test cricketer. I think Australia should not be underestimated. I mean, the obvious other player was Mitchell Starc. I mean, he put his head above the parapet and led a bowling lineup which was pretty inexperienced for a large part. Obviously, Boland and Neser both above 30, but Test experience wise, he didn't have his usual Cummins and Hazelwood partnership. Obviously, Cummins played in that one Test match. But yeah, a kind of interesting experiment. I'm sure for Australians, it was basically bigged up to be maybe the best team that England have come across since the 2010-11 series, and it just looked like more of the same. I think I saw one of a Wisden cricket guy who was out in Australia when he was at the Sydney Test being like, I hope England don't win this because 3-2 would flatter them too much. England didn't win it, and it wasn't too close in the end. But 4-1 was a fair result. I think you just watching a lot of the cricket whilst out there. I think probably, obviously being the time zones out there, it's easier to watch more of it. And it just, England didn't deserve any more than that. The Boxing Day Test, it just played out really, really well for them. And that, they played well, of course they did. But, that is also coming off Australia already being 3-0. And I think them losing in Adelaide was finally when they'd probably started playing cricket to the standard that need to be played at. So, yeah, it was a very interesting one to be out there and just experience the sort of culture of Australia whilst the cricket summer is going on. I think what was another real thing that I think was a thread that I thought was a difference between us and Australia is you can watch Test cricket for free. Channel 7 was often what I was watching it on. And you've got brilliant coverage. I mean, that's who Ponting works for, Broad works for, all of these amazing, very, very technical analysis. They've got Trent Copeland, who's actually never played Australian cricket, I don't think, but was a brilliant first-class player. And he does very cool, like, third-man bits and really well done. But it's just brilliantly put together, but it's also free. And I thought it really made me reflect. And I'm young enough to not really have lived through free Test cricket in England. But it just makes you think like the talent pool will only ever be bigger because you have more people inspired by the cricket that is played on the TV for free. There's no money paywall. There's no elitism in who can view all of this test cricket and absorb all of this knowledge. Also, the coverage is of a top tier, and then you've got Discovery Plus out here in the UK, and various people have taken the Mickey out of it because it was terrible. It was so poor, and the coverage when you're out there, of course, it's their summer and it's in the day, so of course the coverage is going to be better. Discovery Plus and TNT are having to deal with the fact that it's overnight in the UK, so they don't want to pour too much money into it. I get that financial aspect of it, but when you're watching free television with adverts, and that's how they get their money up, and all of those sort of things, and how well it's put together and how good it looks and how the sound engineering is brilliant. They turn up the stump mics just as the ball goes past the bat. So if any edge happens or any chat happens, you hear it, but you also don't hear them chatting when the TV commentators are chatting away and talking technically about what's going on in the cricket. It's just very, very well put together. And I think when you've been in the UK watching the TNT sports coverage, or in my case, muting the TNT sports coverage and listening to TMS in my headphones, you realize how much of a difference it is and how well it's put together. And I think that is an interesting one for the next sort of 50 years of cricket and Ashes cricket, is that will the talent pool for Australia, despite being, a country of about 25 million compared to England's nearly 80 million now, because it's one of their major sports and because they make it free and because they make it easy to be able to watch it as a young person and as a kid, because it's free, you keep having a bigger talent pool. And I guess you're getting into sort of sports society, sort of slightly sociology of sport here. But it does beg that question, and the future of England cricket, how it can compete on the large scale compared to Australia, but then also India, with you've got the population and just sheer love for the game. England fights amongst a lot of sports to get their best sportsmen together, and that's why in my opinion, you end up relying a lot more on foreign international players who come over and do their residency and all of those things. Again, I'm not paid enough money to, I'm not in the position to be making these decisions. I just think there's more that can be done to make cricket a more accessible sport. And I'm sure with sort of how capitalism works, is not really going to take a backward step. We're not going to suddenly not have Sky and TNT or Discovery doing these coverage. But some part of me longs for the Channel 4 days, and everyone talks about 2005 like it was this amazing time. Again, I was 3 at the time, but I can so imagine it was, and I can imagine there was a whole era of cricketers who grew up in that period who would more likely play cricket than any other sport. They'd drag them another way. So I just thought that was something I wanted to harp on about, was how brilliant it was being out in Australia and just seeing free TV, watching cricket and realizing how doable it is and how well it can be done. And I can only imagine the viewing figures were very, very good, especially for certain test matches, which were very, very good. Speaking of Australia and sort of specific to Australia and the things that have been big about this series, it's impossible not to talk about the drop-in wickets. Some of the matches, Perth and the Boxing Day Test especially, zip by in an instant. The wickets were pretty tough to play on. Ian Chappell made put a very, very good article together, and sort of talking about how a lot of people have blamed pitches when they shouldn't do. And I think that is fair enough. And I would recommend reading his article about sort of, it was like a memo to the England and Australia test teams. And it was just, so I couldn't recommend that enough. Did I say Ian Chappell? I think it's Greg Chappell who wrote that article. It's a big cricketing family. But anyway, the argument he was putting across was that there's not enough onus put on the batters, and I think that's so fair. And I think I could do probably a whole video about that article and sort of break it down and talking through it, because I think it's a really beautifully written article on the matter. But to not get confused with what I'm talking about, with the drop in wickets, it's been an interesting case of, again, capitalism in sport. Australia has realised their big moneymaker is the AFL, and they realise the way they can go about making the AFL profitable and not having to cover up wickets on cricket grounds, so say at the Adelaide Oval and places like the MCG and out in Optus, is by literally picking up a wicket, putting it out and growing it somewhere else and then popping it back in for the cricket season. And what that has meant is there have been a lot more volatile pitches, and especially at places like Optus and MCG of the recent few recent few years. And Alistair Cook made that very funny comment about how no one wanted to see runs scored at the MCG after his innings in 2017. and it has kind of proven to be that to be the case a little bit. But it sort of it falls into a lot of things, and again, talking about capitalism in sport and all of these sort of things, it's interesting, and I think it's tough for the viewer, and tough for obviously Cricket Australia. I mean, they had 2 games finished within 2 days. I mean, that in Test cricket is I don't know if it's unprecedented, but it'd be pretty unprecedented. Let's say that. Not that that makes any sense, but it wouldn't have happened very often, to make a sentence which actually works in the English language. But for those sort of days and for those dropping wickets, it begs the question: like, is cricket enough of a priority for that to be the case, or is there just going to be a case that dropping wickets will get better and they'll sort of understand them better and prepare them better? I don't know. Again, pitch creation is not something I have any speciality in. I can just say from a consumer point of view, and as someone who knows a fair amount about his cricket, watching some of those matches, it did feel a bit like Test cricket on fast forward, and that whether or not that was that was helped by Bazball playing poor shots. Don't get me wrong. In Australia, at points did not play there well, and that's kind of Greg Chappell's whole point. But the drop in wicket aspect did it brought up a bit of I guess pride in England in the fact that we still have all those cricket grounds, our cricket grounds, and the soil is the soil from the Old Trafford or from Lords or from wherever. And I guess it's the AFL is quite a unique thing, is it's a totally domestic product. No one watches AFL anywhere else in the world, but it brings in so much more money than Australian cricket can, despite the amount of viewership that Australian cricket does get. All very interesting things. I mean, speaking of things you can make a whole nother video about, but it sort of felt something I should touch on with the drop in wickets, and maybe being out there and being talking about it, and the Australian cricketers talking about it. You could tell there was some sadness in that, and I can understand that for sure. So hey, who knows where will it will go from here? Moving on to sort of back to sort of the cricket and maybe specifically how the series went. I saw Alistair Cook talking about it, and I think a lot of people, I'm sure, who'd ever listen to this or watch this would have heard it as well, was him talking about Perth and how, England had a brilliant day one in Perth. It's easy to forget that now after losing the series 4-1, and then had a pretty good start in the second innings. And I think it was something like we had a lead of about 100 with 1 wicket down. I could be wrong there. And he was just saying to him, it's as simple as, had England batted better in that period and batted for longer and made a bigger lead, and basically gave their bowlers a chance to rest and all of the things that comes with batting time and batting for longer, you get yourself to where the pitch is being a bit less spicy. England may well have won the series, and he sort of framed it as if he thinks it would have been likely that they would win the series. I think that's a big step, but I think it was an interesting conversation to be having. Is that it shows how massive moments can make such a big difference, because basically from that point, as a quick reminder, England got skittled out. Travis Head then played one of the best innings of his life and one of the best Ashes innings I can remember, bashing England all around the park and winning the Test match by, I think it was 8 wickets. And that was a massive moment. And then all of a sudden, having had a great day one where England were ahead of the game, by day 2 it was all over, and we were waking up to Australia having won a classic victory in the first Test match of the Ashes. And I guess that's where you have to give the credit for the special innings of the nature that Travis Head put together, but also England have to take agency over. Was this the moment? Was that their moment to prove all the doubters wrong, to prove that the preparation was right? But the reality is they proved all the doubters right. All of it went wrong. They fell apart. The bowlers weren't fit enough to bowl within the same day effectively, which is kind of fair enough, but also they were undercooked. I don't really care what anyone says. You can tell when a bowler's undercooked, and I think all of them were. So yeah, I think it's basically the sort of simple question I put in my little notes here. So did Perth kill off any hope England had? And I think it would be maybe quite a simple way of looking at it, but maybe not an unfair way of looking at it. Had England won in Perth, they won the toss. No one had ever lost, having batted first at Optus. I think it was 4 for 4 at that point, and England became the first team to bat first and lose on an Optus pitch. And I think, it was that was a moment of unprecedentedness from England, and England sort of followed that suit for the rest of the series. A lot of records you don't want to have. But had England had a bit more pragmatism, a bit more ability to stay around and bat some time, had that have happened, what would happen at the Gabba? What would have happened at Adelaide? And in my opinion, the Gabba epitomised England being not ready for a Test series, and Perth was kind of a bit of half and half. Adelaide, it felt like the first game that we were really, really in it, and it just was a case of they just had enough runs that even that chase, and of course Jamie Smith got out in a poor way in that fourth innings, and it was talked about a lot. So whether or not, had England had all that confidence post their first test match, they win the first test match, where does it go from there? I guess it comes down to sport and the what ifs of sport. But I found that a very interesting thought experiment, and I think Alistair Cook, he's had both been very successful in Australia, but also been absolutely battered on Australia. It was very interesting hearing his thoughts and hearing his moment of that series, where he thinks had that changed, it could have been something different. And I think I said it at some point during the build up. It was, for England fans, it was kind of that hope that kills you. I think that first day and that first Test match really summed that up. It was that first day, everyone was like, "Oh my god, it's working! The fast bowlers are working. The batting is working aggressively when the ball's moving around." And then by day 2, it was all over, and everyone was back to their usual depression pit as an England fan whilst we were in Australia. And I think that really begs that question of how England went about playing their cricket. Would everyone be looking at it in such a positive way? If we'd won this series or even come close to winning that series, say we lose 3-2, but we went into that last test match and it was 2-2 because we'd won the Boxing Day test, say it just stayed exactly the same other than us winning in Perth, everyone would be having a very different feeling compared to having us lost 3-0 by Adelaide and then winning a kind of what felt like a bit of a mental test match at the MCG. And having been there on that Boxing Day, I can assure you it was, as crazy of a day of cricket as I maybe ever will see. It was absolutely mental. And I think, but it didn't feel like there wasn't much on it. And you could joke about all, the Aussies were still hungover and whatever because they just won the Ashes 3-0. And why wouldn't they be? Fair enough to them. I guess that's where it comes down to big moments make big changes in series, and I think Perth really proved to be a massive miss because even though the Gabba, Joe Root batted amazingly, but aside from that, there's not much else you could take from the Gabba. Adelaide, they fought so hard and they did well in points, and it was actually a very close Test match. But again, Australia were just too indomitable, too dominant to be overcome. So yeah, who knows that big what if, and again, it's a big England fans clutching at straws, and I'm sure that's how the Aussies will look at it. And then to finally finish off, and I guess this will tip the cap to the sort of shorts series I'm going to kind of do post the series of sort of report cards for each player, like how they did, how I think they would look, and how their future of Test cricket is looking. But just the best players and performers, and I think Australia, I think it's really obvious. It's that triple, that Head, Carey, Stark. They were just 3 that just were another level, and none of the England players got to the levels that they got to. I think the difference between, as I said, Stark and any of the England bowlers was so big. Duckett and so Head and any of the England batters, barring Root, but especially the openers, was well ahead. And then Carey versus Smith, it couldn't be a bigger gap if you ask me. And I think I've seen Australians talk about it, is not only his batting, which was pretty good, but it was, to his standard and a bit above it, versus it was more his keeping. He's standing up to the stumps against Neser and Boland. Excuse me. He's standing up to the stumps to those two. His energy behind the stumps as well. Jamie Smith, if you watch a full day of Test cricket, you kind of only realise it maybe when England are doing badly. But he sat there silently behind the stumps. He might make the occasional chat. He's a pretty good glover. I don't think he's bad. And again, all I have to go off is the eye test. I'm a seam bowler myself. I've barely kept wicket in my life. I can't pretend I know any of the technical ins and outs. But when you just watch it, they just look a different level, Carey and Smith. And I guess, especially when England fans had been used to Ben Foakes and they'd got to the level of watching Ben Foakes a lot, it's hard to then watch Smith and not think, is he adding enough with the bat to be worth not having the people argue is the best glover in the world in Ben Foakes? You've also got so many other keeper batters, Jordan Cox, James Rue. Again, it's hard to not start thinking these other people would be better, having seen Smith play how he did at points. But again, I'm getting bogged down in negative things. I'm trying to do this as like the best performers. So going on those 3, they were head above the parapet, better than anyone. Speaking of people who were buzzing around the field, Labuschagne was unbelievable in the field. I think he got a few 50-plus scores, but he didn't do much with the bat. But his fielding was such a big part of the series. Smith, again, great catcher and a great skipper. Batted well at the SCG, but aside from that, didn't do all that much with the bat. But again, didn't really need to for the most part. And again, you could go through the Australia team. I mean, Nisa had a brilliant series coming in as a sort of surprise replacement, and I think he will never he as always probably won't get the credit he deserves. And then I guess lastly, the interesting one, I guess, you go for the England team. I think Joe Root, you have to give a passing grade to. You know, he did what he needed to do. He scored bulk runs in 2 games, and for a batter having 200s in a 5-match series, even if you don't do particularly well, I think you have to be like, well, you're doing your job to put England in positions to win test matches. Aside from him, it's difficult to really pinpoint anyone other than Jacob Bethel, of course, with the bat, who had a brilliant 100 in the SCG test and looked brilliant in the MCG. I mean, I think he secured the number 3 spot for the foreseeable future. And you should have seen the Australians on the TV on Channel 7 watching him play. I mean, they were it felt like there was drooling going on. He looked that pure. That innings was so good, and I'm sure everyone knows how good it was. But seeing kind of Australian ex-pros, Justin Langer, Ricky Ponting, Greg Blewett, all of these players talking about it and how they were talking about it was real hyperbole. Was nice to see as an England fan. I'll say that. Another one, Josh Tongue. I think you cannot look at this bowling lineup, and I was disappointed by almost all of them at points. Josh Tongue never did. He was brilliant. He bowled so well at that Boxing Day test that I saw, but also just throughout the series, he was the only one who bowled full enough, who challenged the stumps, who moved it around and was consistent. I mean, he still went an economy above 4, I believe, but that's kind of what you expect from a Josh Tongue. And I just wish that we'd had the bowlers surrounding him, the control bowlers, the bowlers who can bowl a lot more overs and bowl at a lower economy. But we didn't. We didn't go for that. That wasn't the blueprint. But Josh Tongue not playing in every single test match, looking back on it, feels like a missed opportunity. And the fact that when he started playing, he didn't take the new ball was infuriating. Bryden Cast being trotted out as an opening bowler will never not annoy me. And in the future, it will continue to annoy me looking back on this series. He actually, he gave his all, Bryden Cast, and he bowled real hard overs and long spells. But him opening up with a new ball just feels like a waste. And it proved to be a waste. I don't think he did all that well with the new ball at any point. Whereas Josh Tongue was really good. So again, I don't want to go ebb and flow. Steve Smith, I think we're talking about captains. I think he massively outdid Ben Stokes in the captaincy, sort of how they captained. I think Ben Stokes got a bit too jumpy. He didn't go here nor there, and he tried to change things too quickly. Whereas Australia and Steve Smith and Pat Cummins in that one game, I think they're just more willing to let tactical periods play out rather than feeling the need to change. And I think there was so much, I think John Usagi said this, there was so much going on in Ben Stokes' brain, there was so much going on in that series. I just don't think his captaincy was quite up to the standards we've got used to as England fans, because he's a brilliant captain, a brilliant tactical captain, as well as a leader. But the Aussies were sort of looking at it like, oh, is he even that good tactical captaincy? Is he just a bit of follow me, I'm going to bowl a 10 over spell? That was kind of the view that Aussie players and ex-pros had on the TV and people you chatted to just, at the pub or wherever you might be in the crowd. That became the kind of vibe that Stokes was as a captain. And I think England fans who've watched it for the last few years would actually not say that's true. He's really tactically astute, but I think it's in series where he's maybe not had enough. His energy's being pulled left, right and centre, if that's a phrase, which it isn't. Another thing that was interesting, and I know this might, if this is released as a clip or whatever, will be ruffle some feathers. It was interesting talking to some local Aussie people, because I think you usually get the impression that everyone was fine with Steve Smith being captain in Australia, and it was only English fans who had issue with it, with his cheating record and the stuff that came with him in the Sandpaper Gate. But I met multiple Australians. A guy I chatted to for quite a long period of time sat next to me at the Boxing Day test. He was furious about it. My family who are out there, they didn't think he should be. I think he's a brilliant captain, and no one can take that away from him. And I never would say he shouldn't have played. He served a band. He should play. I just can't understand how you can go from saying Tim Payne, we've got this bastion of good ladness, and that proved to be untrue. But then going on to Pat Cummins, and then naming him a vice captain, I could understand when Pat Cummins was there. But him being the captain when Pat Cummins' finally injury did come, as a fast bowler it likely would. When you've got someone like Travis Head on the wings, or Marnus Labuschagne in the wings, and I know Labuschagne wasn't sure if they were going to pick him or not, but it just feels like it just shows that maybe you just don't care that much that this guy was the head of your cricket team when you got caught in the biggest cricket cheating scandal since, I don't know, quite a long time, and especially Australia, who I think has been a kind of bastion of Test match greatness for a very, very long time, and I think they're the most consistently great Test team probably ever. Actually, no, not probably. I think ever. I think you could say that with certainty. It reassured me in a way that a lot of Australian fans saw it in the perspective of others, in that the fact that he probably shouldn't be in captaincy, he shouldn't be captain, and if that weakens Australia's team by a 5% compared to a Travis Head, compared to a Marnus Labuschagne, compared to whomever they might give the captaincy other than him, that, in my opinion, is fine, and you should take that on the chin because he got caught cheating as a captain, or Cameron Bancroft did on his behalf. But just sort of blaming Bancroft and Warner and then letting Smith be a captain again because we know he's a really good captain just feels, I don't know, to me just feels weak, and I don't understand why they felt they couldn't do that and go with the Travis Head or go with the Marnus Labuschagne. Who knows? Again, I'm not the one making that decision. It's Cricket Australia's decision. What I'm just saying is it was interesting realising that Australians, again, from the outward perspective, it seemed like anyone who's Australian would be totally backing Steve Smith as captain all the way. I'll be interested if I do release this as a clip, will there be people saying, no, I agree, I think there should have been a different captain? And again, it seemed like with the 4-1 series that you had, you didn't need Steve Smith as captain. You would have been fine with the sort of 5% worse captain in a Travis Head or whatever. But you'd also be maybe harbouring or grooming your next Test captain. Because Pat Cummins, I don't know, actually, they're all the similar kind of ages. So I guess that's maybe not true. Anyway, that was the one last thing I wanted to just go through in this Ashes review, was the Steve Smith captaincy debate, and if it is a debate, I think a lot of people are too unwilling to talk about it. If you ask me, in the mainstream media, I know people would have talked about it, but I think it's worth the debate, and I think it's not unfair to have a debate about it. And I totally, I'd love to hear other people's views, and I will release this as a clip. So I'd love to, drop any comments and thoughts you have, wherever you might be listening to this. Anyway, that's kind of the last thing I had to sort of get through, the thing I wanted to talk about. So I hope, people have really enjoyed this. It's a sort of brief me just spieling and getting all my thoughts and feelings out, as often these podcasts are. But yeah, I guess this falls within the realm of a podcast slash a sort of short video about it. But we're up to 30 minutes, so I guess we can call it podcast at this point. But anyway, thank you so much for watching or listening or wherever you might be. Make sure you drop a follow, subscribe, leave a comment. And I always get to the comments. I try my best to reply to every single one. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.